Okay, today we're covering chapter 24, lesson 2, part 3. We're going to talk about the colonial times in Australia and New Zealand. So at the beginning, what happened when Europeans came to Australia and New Zealand? Who can tell me what happens when exactly they were colonized, or from which country Australia and New Zealand were colonized? Adham?
But can we please just repeat yesterday part?
Ahmed, sorry?
Miss, can you repeat yesterday's part in the lesson?
Tomorrow, inshallah, I will revise the whole lesson.
Okay,
Okay?
thanks.
You're welcome. Adam, can you tell me about the colonial times?
Okay. They got colonized by Holland or Netherlands, Spain, France, and the Portuguese. When their explorers visited Oceania, this happened during the 16,000s, 18,000s, and 17,000s. Some of these explorers went to the shore to explore coastal areas and search for supplies for this region. And in 1642, uh, an East Indian Dutch company sent Abel Tasman on a mission to sail around Australia. During his travel of discovery, he circled the island of Tasmania and saw New Zealand's coast. Then Europeans came to colonize this region after a century.
Okay, so at the beginning, as Adham mentioned, Australia and New Zealand were colonized by the British as usual. You'll find that at each country, British, or actually the British people, always colonize these countries of the New World as they consider it. But the British weren't the first Europeans to arrive. We had many explorers from other countries who were sailing around Australia and landing on its shores. Okay, but we can memorize, or we can recognize the British at the beginning. But we also had the Dutch, the Spanish, the French, the Portuguese explorers who were coming actually to visit Oceania, and some of them mapped Australia's coastline. Even when we went ashore to explore coastal areas and search for supplies, whereas they were only going there to search for supplies, not to explore it. But the Dutch East India Company sent someone who was called Abel Tasman on a mission to sail around the Australian continent. But during his trip, he found, or he discovered, Tasman, and he circled the islands of Tasmania, and then he sighted the coast of New Zealand more than a century would pass. However, before Europeans started colonizing the region. So the first trial to colonize the region was at the beginning. There was many trials from the Spanish, the Dutch, the French, the Portuguese explorers, but the first real one, or the first explorer, was Abel Tasman, who was sent by the Dutch East India Company to circle the island of Tasmania, which is known as Tasmania now because of his name. And he also saw the coast of New Zealand, and it was like a century before the Europeans started colonizing the area. So this was the first trial. Who can again tell me what was the first trial in order to colonize Australia and New Zealand? Uta? Uta,
There were, yes, miss.
go ahead.
At the beginning, there was a lot of trials by the Deutsch, the Spanish, the French, and the Portuguese explorers. But then, the first in 1642, the first Deutsch East Indian Company sent uh, Appel Tasman
Yes.
on a mission to sail around the Australian continent, and he discovered New Zealand and Australia.
Thank you very much. Then we will be moving to British Australia or at a time where Britain were colonizing Australia. Who can tell me about the most well-known explorer and how did he carried out his trip in order or his explorer? I'll start with Hannah Yasser. Go ahead.
James Cook was the most well-known British explorer. Uh, he carried out his voyages. He carried them out on 3 voyages during the 1760s and the 1770s. Uh, after Cook's exploration, the British government um, prepared to settle these unexplored lands of Australia. Most of them were sent to Australia not by choice, they were forced to. Then in 1788, Britain sent 11 ships known as the first fleet that known as the first fleet to Australia. They were they carried 778 convicted criminals from Britain. The first fleet also had 250 soldiers and government officials. This was the first shipment for about 1,600 160,000
Convicts.
160,000 convicts convicts that were sent to Australia during the coming 80 years because of the lack um, because England lacked space to imprison them. Then uh, also the living conditions were unbearable. They were terrible. Also, the punishments were extremely harsh for those criminals um, in Australia in these unsanitary, filthy prisons. For many years, Australia also was known for many years as the prison colony for most of the world.
Yes. Thank you, Hannah, very much.
And then,
Go
okay,
ahead.
thank you.
Okay. You still have a point?
Okay, I continue. I continue or not?
Yes, go ahead. Continue.
Okay. Then in the late 1700s, they began to form settlements in Sydney. They were the colonists weren't quick to come to that area, but they little by little it grew into a busy center of trade and industry. Those the settling in of the inland areas of Australia did not happen for many years, which means they only settled it for a couple of years, but not for a long time. Only a few people, um, other than the criminals that escaped, other than the criminals that escaped. By the 1880s, most of the continent had been already settled and explored by the Europeans or the British. Then in 1851, back to 1851, the English prospector found gold near the Bathurst in New South Wales. After that, not long after that, people from all over, which were approximately thousands of people, came to that area to dig the discovered gold, and they would spread across the globe. People from also around the world flocked to Australia at approximately 90,000 people per year, looking hoping to find gold. Also, England, Ireland, China, United States sent prospectors as well. From then on, Australia began to uh, prosper, and for other reasons as well, such as while they were looking for gold, they found also other resources such as coltan, copper, um, such coltan and copper. Also, also jobs began to be open because of the mining jobs. Business owners also started to build shops and hotels when wherever towns began to form, and they and people would spend their money there, which caused which that was one of the reasons Australia started to grow. Also, many small towns began to grow into cities, and also farm plantations. Farmers started plantations and in the most fertile lands of Australia. Also, another reason was that ranchers um, brought sheep and cattle from overseas, from foreign land, and Australia's ranching industry was born. Vast ranches called the stations were built
Okay, Hannah, seems that you have an internet problem, but thank you very much for your efforts. Let me summarize the British Australia for you guys. The first well-known explorer was James Cook. He was coming to Australia طبعا for exploration. The British government prepared and sent settlers to the wild unexplored land of Australia. So the first trial was from James Cook. He was coming to explore Australia. Okay. Then they started to send settlers to the wild of unexplored land of Australia. But the first colonists were sent to Australia didn't go by choice. Actually, they were forced to. So after James Cook, people who went to Australia, they were forced to go. The ships carried 778 convicted criminals and also 250 soldiers. So the first ship or the first fleet who landed on Australia had both soldiers and criminals, which طبعا a very harsh يعني, experience. Then the government, they were sent by the government officials. This was the first shipment. The first shipment had convicted criminals, had soldiers, was sent to explore the shores of Australia, wasn't by choice. Then we'll move to the next one.
I'm sorry, I'm so sorry, my internet suddenly cut off.
No problem, Johanna. I noticed. That's
Okay,
why
thank you.
you're welcome. That's why we call it the prison colony. يبقى when I ask you here, guys, a question, why do we call Australia the prison colony? Your answer will be as follows: that the first shipment to explore the shores of Australia or the first fleet consists of 778 convicted criminals, 250 soldiers, and they were living in terrible conditions and punishments because طبعا living in Australia was very cruel and very harsh, and they went there not by their choice but by force. Okay, this is the first one. Then after that, the settlement began to form in Sydney. So when did the settlement start to begin? It began in Sydney, but they were very slow in the area. Very slow because طبعا there was nothing to encourage them to continue. Trade, industry, and farming wasn't very good. The living there was very harsh. The outback weather wasn't that good. After that, most of the continent was explored by Europeans. So they explored the continent by the year 1880, but it wasn't actually, it was colonized, or there wasn't many colonized. But in the year of 1851, an English prospector found gold near New South Wales. This was a turning point for the colonizing countries. Once they have figured out that there was gold discovered there, on all parts of Australia, people started to rush from all over the world or from around the world. So what was the turning point in order to build settlements there? It was the discovery of gold. With the discovery of gold, people from all around the world flocked to Australia. So people were coming actually like the rate was like 90,000 per year. All people were going there in the hope to find gold. So before I go further, who can tell me first what was the first trial and the first shipment had which people? Pamika? Pamika? Pamika not here? Okay, Pamika, go ahead. Tell me when was the first trial or who was the first explorer and what did he have with him? Actually, Pamika, we have been repeating his name many times. Okay, Ritaj Ramadan. Thank you, Pamika. Ritaj Ramadan.
Yes, miss.
Can you tell me the name of the first?
His name Cook.
Yes, and the first shipment had.
Had soldiers
Yes.
and criminals.
Yes. Okay, it has 250 soldiers and 778 convicted criminals. Was it easy for them to live there? Let me ask. Okay, Laura. Laura, was it easy for them to live there in Australia?
No, it was not easy because the living conditions were not rich. Like they had punishments and they were in prison for a while, and the prison was filthy, dirty, and it was harsh for them.
Yes, thank you very much. So life there was very harsh for them. Why do we call today Australia? Why do we call Australia the prison continent? Who can tell me why do we call Australia the prison continent? Okay, let me see. Ahmed Magdi.
Yes, miss.
Why do we call Australia the prison continent? Hmm.
Um, because
Yes. Hmm.
no, I don't know.
You don't know. Who can tell me why do we call Australia the prison continent? Hannah Hani.
Yes, miss.
Can you tell me why do we call Australia the prison continent?
Because it had 778 criminals and 250 soldiers,
Yes, who were
and they were
present.
treated harshly.
Yes, and they were present there in filthy prisons for many years. Okay. Then we moved, thank you, Hannah. Then we moved to the beginning of the year 1700. It was a settlement. Settlements began to form. Where they began to form in Sydney. But colonists were slow. Why colonists were slow to come? Laura, why colonists were slow to come to the country?
Because Sydney was a busy center for the trade and industry, so they were late to come.
Now, after that, Sydney grew a busy center of trade, but living there was harsh and it was full of criminals. And few people were escaping this prison. And the rough outback. How that's why it was slow for them to grow a settlement. So again, thank you, Laura. Again, it
No,
was slow.
can you repeat this part?
Okay, I will repeat it. It was a slow for them to grow a settlement there because living there was harsh. There were criminals who were escaping the prisons there. Living in the outback was also harsh, the weather and the mountains. So they were growing. Trade and industry was growing busy center there, but it wasn't that fast. Then everything changed, or there was a turning point after they discovered what? Uta, can you tell me what was the turning point?
Discovering gold.
Yes, when they discovered gold, it was their turning point actually. When they discovered gold, so people from all over the world started to come and spread across the continent. So as you can see here, okay, people were flocked from Australia in very big rate to hoping that we will find a bounty of gold. And they came from as far as England, Ireland, China, United States. Then Australia began to grow for other reasons. What are the other reasons? Australia began to grow for other reasons, as well as when resources such as coal, tin, copper were discovered. Workers also came for mining, and job and business owners started to build shops and hotels. So this was the other turning point for people in Australia. When people started to discover resources such as coal, tin, copper, people started to come to work in mining jobs and to build shops to sell their products and to build hotels in order to stay there. And towns were springing up there, and people were spending money in small towns grow into cities. Farmer بقى started to plant crops in order to feed these people who are coming. So they have planted crops in Australia's most fertile areas, because as we know from the physical geography, that not Australia has fertile soil. Then ranchers brought sheep, cattle from overseas, and Australia ranching industry was born. And this is till today one of the most important industries in Australia. Vast ranches were called stations. Stations have covered millions of acres in outback and other areas, and today millions of sheep, cattle live on our ranches, in all across Australia. So the first reason that Ota said was the discovery of gold. But there was another turning point which has affected the area. Hannah Hani, can you tell me?
Yes, because they discovered the new resources such as coal, tin, and copper, and also workers came from mining jobs, and business owner built shops and hotels.
Yes. Also, they have starting farming crops in order to feed people there and started to make stations. What are the stations? Who can tell me what are the stations? Mehad, Mehad Shaban, what are the stations?
What are they?
Stations.
What are the stations?
Mm.
Vast ranchers
Yes, they are vast ranches.
covered
Mm.
it covered millions of acres in the outback and other areas.
Substations are made to raise what? Yeah, yeah, Mehad?
Sheep's
Sheep, cattle, and other animals that were
on
coming.
ranches all across Australia.
Yes, because before this, we didn't have this variety of animals living there. We only had animals which has pouches like the kangaroos and the flightless birds like the moe. But before this, we didn't have all of these variety of animals. But people, when they started to settle down Australia, they started also to build stations, and they brought different animals from overseas to Australia, and they have built stations or vast ranges. Okay. Uh, then I guess I will not cover today the conflict. I will not cover today the conflict. But anyone want to ask any question about the last part?
Maybe I have a question.
Yes, go ahead, because I'm gonna summarize
There
it. Huh?
are, there are four reasons that it became more turning points, right? There were four reasons,
For
or
reasons for
almost
what?
four reasons that Australia became more popular.
and more relevant and
Can
that
you-
more future.
Can you tell us about these reasons, yeah, Mamika, from what you heard?
One, that they discovered gold,
Yes.
and two, that they started discovering more things like tin, copper.
Mm-hmm.
Four, people wanted jobs, so they went to hotels
Yes.
for money. And four, there was something, a new industry was born called the ranching industry. So they and vast ranches, and these vast ranches were called stations.
Yes.
These are the four reasons.
Yes. These are the four main reasons. Yes. But at the beginning, there was only one reason to come.
Okay, the gold.
No, before the gold, at the beginning, when they started to settle down, it was only one reason to put the criminals in prisons there.
The prison state.
Yes. Actually, you summarized them all. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
So these are actually the four reasons people started to come and settle down and build settlements in Australia. But before these reasons, people were only coming to put criminals and convicted criminals in prisons because living there was very harsh. There was no mining, no gold, no stations, no farmers, no farming, no hotels, nothing. It was very deserted. So they wanted to punish people by putting them there. Okay, anyone want to ask any question before I end the session? Please, guys, read ahead. Read the challenges and the conflict for tomorrow, inshallah. We'll be also studying British New Zealand, which will not be more different from the British Australia. And I will be finishing the lesson tomorrow, inshallah. We'll talk about the independent countries and Australia today and New Zealand today, I guess. It is the last part. So please prepare the lesson ahead so we can work on it together and we can discuss it together. I will also, if I finish quickly, I will have like a revision for all lesson from the beginning till the end. So I will start to revise the lesson from the beginning. Uta, please, can you highlight the part that you don't understand? Send it to me so I can start the session tomorrow with it. Okay, Uta? So please, guys, spread the word. If you have like a highlighted part that you want to ask about, please specify the part. And tomorrow, inshallah, I will start the session with it, okay? Yes, Mihad.
بس هو قطع نت قطع فالحركة بتنضايق عليه يعني.
I know, I've noticed. It was there till the last moment. So please, guys, spread the word. If you have like any questions about the lesson, the history lesson, because you will be asked as usual to do a timeline for all the history lesson with all the events, okay? So please, if you have like any questions, specify the points, then we can tomorrow, inshallah, discuss it before we end the lesson.
Okay. When is the timeline due?
The timeline due will be Saturday night. So you can start your vacation without any homeworks or nothing. But just read the lesson and tell me if you don't have a point that you need to retaught, okay?
About chapter 24, right? All about chapter 24?
Chapter 24, lesson 2 in particular, the history lesson.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah, see you tomorrow, inshallah. Bye.